The 5 Widows of Willow Creek Ranch. Have you ever seen a man who had already buried his dreams, who had long given up on life ever surprising him again, only to witness his world change in the most unexpected way? That's the story you're about to hear. And if you stay with me until the end, I promise this tale will leave you with a truth you'll carry for the rest of your days. Even the loneliest life can be transformed by courage, compassion, and the family we never knew we were meant to find. Thomas McGraw was a retired cowboy, a man whose hands were calloused from years of roping cattle, whose eyes had seen too many sunsets bleed across the wild plains in silence. His ranch, the Willow Creek Spread, had once echoed with the thunder of hooves and the shouts of hired hands. But that was decades ago. Time had stripped it down to creaking gates, empty corrals, and the weary sigh of wind through broken boards. Thomas lived alone in that silence. His wife had passed 20 years earlier, and they'd never been blessed with children. Friends moved away, others buried beneath the prairie earth. The old man spent his days fixing what didn't need fixing, patching fences no cattle would test, rocking on the porch with only coyotes to sing him to sleep. To most, his life would look empty. To Thomas, it was simply routine. He had convinced himself he was fine with solitude, that his story was finished, and all he had left was to wait for the quiet end. But destiny has a way of knocking when you least expect it. One autumn evening, as the sun slipped low, Thomas heard voices, faint, hesitant, carrying the weight of sorrow. He rose from his chair, leaning on his cane, and squinted toward the dusty road. What he saw made him freeze. 5 women, young yet worn by grief, were walking slowly toward his gate. Their dark hair framed faces etched with pain, but their posture spoke of resilience. Each carried bundles on her back. Their clothes were simple, their eyes searching, not with fear, but with quiet strength. They were Apache widows. Their husbands had been taken by a recent raid, victims of a bloody conflict Thomas had thought long over. With nowhere to go, no tribe willing to shelter them, they had wandered in search of survival. Somehow, their path had led them to Willow Creek. At first, Thomas stiffened. He had grown up in a time when cowboys and Apache rarely stood on the same side of history. His heart wrestled with suspicion and habit. But then he looked closer. He saw not enemies, but 5 human souls, weary, carrying grief like he carried his own. And in that moment, his loneliness collided with their desperation, creating a silence so heavy he couldn't ignore it. He opened the gate. "You can rest here," he said simply, his voice rough as gravel. The women exchanged wary glances, but one, the eldest, her name Ayana, stepped forward and nodded. "We will work," she whispered. "We will not be a burden." And just like that, the emptiness of Willow Creek Ranch began to shift. At first, the arrangement was fragile. The widows kept mostly to themselves, rising early to fetch water, cooking simple meals, repairing torn clothes. Thomas watched from a distance, not sure how to bridge the canyon between them. The ranch felt alive again, yet he feared speaking too much, afraid to disturb the fragile peace. But slowly, small sparks of humanity lit the shadows. One morning, Thomas awoke to the sound of laughter, soft, hesitant, then rolling like spring rain. The women were washing clothes by the creek, playfully splashing each other despite the chill. That laughter echoed through the valley, stirring memories in Thomas's chest he thought long dead. Days turned to weeks. The widows began tending the neglected garden, coaxing green life from dry earth. They mended the broken roof, scrubbed the dust-caked floors, and filled the air with the smell of warm bread. In return, Thomas taught them the ranch work he knew best: how to saddle a horse, how to mend a fence, how to read the signs of approaching storms. The language between them was often halting, half words, half gestures, but understanding grew. And then something extraordinary happened. The ranch, once silent as a grave, began to pulse with life again. Children from nearby homesteads came to trade vegetables and stayed to listen to the widows sing their soft, haunting songs by the fire. The neighbors, who once avoided Thomas's lonely ranch, began visiting again, curious about the sudden change. Where there had been only sorrow and silence, there was now warmth, music, and the fragrance of shared meals. For the first time in decades, Thomas felt something he thought had been buried with his wife, hope. But life does not transform without trials. One winter night, a group of men rode to Willow Creek. They were ranchers from a neighboring town, bitter over old grudges with the Apache. They sneered when they saw the women, calling them trespassers, demanding Thomas send them away. "You don't know what you're bringing on yourself, old man," one of them growled. Thomas felt his heart pound. For a moment, the fear of returning to solitude almost won. He could let the widows go, pretend their arrival had been a passing kindness. But then he looked at them, Ayana's steady eyes, the youngest widow clutching her shawl, the quiet strength in their stance despite their fear. And something inside Thomas, hardened by years of loneliness, finally broke open. "No," he said firmly. His voice carried the weight of every year he had endured alone. "They stay. This is their home as much as it is mine. You want to drive them out, you'll have to drive me out first." The standoff was tense, but the men saw the fire in Thomas's eyes, the same fire that had carried him through cattle drives, storms, and gunfights long ago. They muttered curses but turned their horses, vanishing into the night. From that moment, Willow Creek Ranch was no longer just Thomas's. It was a sanctuary. Seasons passed. The widows, once bowed by grief, blossomed into pillars of resilience. They taught Thomas the old ways of healing with herbs, shared stories of their ancestors by firelight, and brought a rhythm of community back to the ranch. In turn, Thomas gave them safety, guidance, and something deeper, a fatherly presence they had longed for since losing their husbands. The ranch thrived. Gardens flourished, herds returned, neighbors once divided began to trade and share again. Word spread of the widows of Willow Creek, and their story inspired others across the plains. Where once there had been division, there was now unity. Where once there had been sorrow, there was strength. And Thomas, once a man resigned to die alone, discovered that family does not always come by blood. Sometimes it arrives in the form of strangers at your gate, carrying both grief and the seeds of new beginnings. Years later, when Thomas finally passed, it was not in silence. The 5 women, their children, and neighbors who had become family gathered at Willow Creek to honor him. The man who thought his story had ended in loneliness had instead written a new chapter of love, resilience, and unity. And if you take nothing else from this story, let it be this: no matter how empty life may seem, no matter how long the silence has stretched, a single act of kindness can turn sorrow into laughter, strangers into family, and a lonely home into a place where hope lives again. Because sometimes, the people who save us are the ones we never expected to arrive at our gate. Sparkle's ending note for viewers. If this story touched your heart, remember, it's never too late for your life to change. Compassion is the seed of transformation, and family is often found in the most unexpected places.